If you followed any of the videos on this channel over the last couple of years, you may well have heard me try to make the case for more climate action in the UK. And more broadly, you may have made me slip into the occasional small p political statement, maybe suggesting that we should vote for those who are promising more climate action, that maybe we should suggesting that government policy should be more advanced on decarbonisation, and it isn't sufficient in certain areas. But I've tried to be fairly objective. I'm trying to reach out to as broad an audience as possible and not kind of make certain groups and certain people feel unwelcome. I must admit, if you've known me over the last 10 years or seen me on Twitter or seen me on election night, you might see a slightly different story. But anyway, I'm trying to be a broad church, trying to welcome everyone. But sometimes politicians manage to get you pretty riled up, get me pretty riled up. And when you see the news of the accounts of wildfire in Greece and in North America, as we've seen in the last couple of weeks, and then extreme temperatures across Europe at the same time as extreme flooding in India, and then we see the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero spouting climate denialism, misinformation, delay, all this kind of stuff, it gets me fairly frustrated. So, Grant Shapps, this video is for you. So this week, our Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero uploaded a video on Twitter, and this is my reaction.
Let me tell you why it's crazy not to grant any more gas and oil licenses. Unless that is, of course, you're going to tell the popular.
Wait. Let's stop there. So no new oil and gas licenses, and where's that come from? So that's the request of Just Stop Oil. That's what the campaign is all about. That request is based on a statement by Fatih Birol, who's that big climate activist, campaigner, lefty, woke RT. No, that's the executive director for the International Energy Agency, the advisory body for all governments on how we should shape energy policy, not low carbon energy policy, energy policy. He said in 2021, 2 years ago, if government is serious about the climate crisis, there can be no new oil, gas and coal from this year. The executive director of the IEA said that 2 years ago. Okay, so yes, Grant Shapps, if that's your real name, we are under a fairly serious obligation to stop opening up new oil and gas, new fossil fuel extraction today. We're 2 years too late. That needs to happen. Back to the video.
Don't heat your home with gas anymore, and almost immediately stop driving your petrol car. And assuming you're not.
Okay, so wait. He's suggesting that if we stop granting new licenses for oil and gas extraction, we'll stop having any oil and gas straight away. Well, that's just not true. First of all, we'll carry on extracting from the existing resources, the existing reserves. It's new licenses in the future we want to deal with. A spreadsheet found from the Office of National Statistics suggests that we have an estimated 221 billion cubic meters in reserves of natural gas in the UK, and that we extract about 33 billion cubic meters each year, or have done over the last few years. And it's a similar story for oil. We think we've got about 411 million tons of oil, and we extract around 41 million tons each year. So I'm not an oil and gas magnate. I don't necessarily work in this part of the industry, and I may be misinterpreting what I read here, but I think that suggests that we've got proven reserves in the UK that we already have and we're already extracting, many of which we are already open. They don't need to grant a new license. This is what we already have, and that for me means we have up to 6.5 years of gas reserves, even if we didn't reduce our gas use, and maybe 10 years of oil reserves if we didn't reduce our oil use. So not granting new licenses for extraction, that gives us a great opportunity and a target to hit. It gives us a chance to spend a few years to work to reduce our emissions. It's not the end of oil and gas overnight. We could stretch out what we have left but move away, transition away from it as quickly as possible. Transition away from high emissions fuel. And this is like before we start to think about our emissions responsibility. Why have we set a net zero target? Because we are responsible for causing climate change to some extent. If we started to if we explored new fields and dug up the oil and gas in them, we will exceed our obligations under the Paris Agreement. So what's the plan, Mr. Shapps, Secretary of State for Net Zero? What's the plan? And anyway, the Committee on Climate Change has pointed out that it tends to take on average about 28 years from granting a new license to commencing production on an oil or gas field. So granting a new license for oil and gas today may mean that we're still not in production by 2050. Does that date sound a bell? Secretary of State for Net Zero? Does it sound familiar at all? And why would we even need oil and gas by 2050, by 2035, by 2040? We've committed to stopping the sale of new fossil fuel vehicles by 2030. We won't be building new homes with gas boilers from 2025. At some point soon, we'll need much less gas and we'll need much less oil. Surely the demand is going to fall away as your policies, Mr. Shapps, get put in place. Let's see what else he says.
Do that, really what you're saying is we're going to import that oil and gas instead. But in which case, be honest about it. If you're going to import it, you put ourselves at the behest of people like Putin.
He's talking about importing from Putin and foreign imports. That's what we already do anyway. We use oil and gas on a global market, which has the price set by a global market. It's not as if we only use the oil that we find in the North Sea for our own benefit. This is stuff we get from everywhere.
Foreign imports, which also means, and here's the real crunch, importing twice as much CO2 as producing it domestically. And that's why Keir Starmer's policy for Labour of stopping all oil and gas imports is absolutely insane.
He says that Keir Starmer's policy for Labour of stopping oil and gas imports is absolutely insane. I don't think that is the policy. But anyway, Labour's plan will mean that we need less fossil fuels. Investment in energy efficiency, in renewable energy, in heat pumps, in electric vehicles will mean we need less fossil fuels. And surely we should be targeting less fossil fuels, not maximising the fuel that we have in the ground. So he makes that point that importing oil and gas will increase emissions. Well, Carbon Brief suggests that's not right, and that actually some countries around the world will have a lower emissions for the oil and gas that they extract because they deal with methane emissions better from those wells. I mean, there's loads of stuff that we could say about this. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change suggests that we can't afford to burn the stuff that's in the ground that we know about. So it says 30% of oil reserves that someone has on a spreadsheet saying we have a value next to this, we can't afford to burn. 50% of gas reserves we can't afford to burn. 80% of coal reserves we can't afford to burn. And that's if we're going to limit warming to below 2 degrees C. So that's not even thinking about 1.5 degrees C, that's 2 degrees C. And then the UN Environment Programme, they suggest that current global plans we already have plans for production, that would extract more than double the amount of fossil fuels in 2030 that would be consistent to global warming of 1.5 degrees. So this agreement, the Paris Agreement that we've tried to work towards to limit global warming for 1.5 degrees, our plans are already too much to limit to that. In the UK, hundreds of scientists and academics have written a letter to the Prime Minister saying that the UK should commit to preventing any new oil and gas field development. And the government should state that this commitment clearly, really, really clearly in its forthcoming revised net zero strategy. This is what the academics, the scientists, this is what they're saying has to happen. Grant Shapps, they're saying this has to happen, but Grant Shapps, in an attempt to try and put a nasty oil political stain on the opposition, is saying that he's going to max out oil and gas reserves in the UK. Head in hand, fingers in ears, nothing to see here. Grant Shapps would be actively increasing climate risk, actively condemning millions to disaster, and actively provoking catastrophe in our global systems. in order to score a cheap political point on the Labour Party, whose policy on this stuff is better than his, but still not drastic enough. So let's be really clear. At the next election, let's vote these hoodlums out of power. I've got a rule for voting ABC, anything but Conservative. I mean, actually, there's a few other parties that we should ignore in a vote as well. But anyway, at the next election, let's vote for climate action, not delay, not denial, not disinformation.